Hello and welcome to Homespun Haints Live. I am Becky,
And I'm Diana.
and we are here tonight to tell you about more spooky Southern women and their ghosts.
Seriously, this
Yes.
is this is a trend in case you hadn't noticed.
Well, it
This
is
is what we
Women's
do.
History Month, and what better way
Exactly.
to celebrate women in history than by talking about the spirits that may still be among us?
I love it.
We went to the Sorrel Weed House in Savannah. This is the location of two tragic women's deaths. Or is it?
Well, I hear it's the most haunted place in Savannah, is that right?
It is considered to be so. It is considered to be so incredibly haunted. When you go there to the Sorrel Weed House, you can either do a private investigation or you can go on a tour, a group tour, and a lot of people experience things even on the tour. So I highly recommend, if you are in the Savannah area, definitely check out the Sorrel Weed House, go on a tour at night, and be aware that they do not have any bathrooms on the premises. They do let you use the hotel across the street. We didn't know that. But they don't have a bathroom, they don't have any plumbing, and they won't let you in if you are inebriated.
That's probably wise.
Yes, exactly. So don't go while drunk, folks. But do check it out because it is very haunted. When you first enter the house, you automatically start feeling the weight of history on your shoulders. Maybe it's the fact that it's very dimly lit. Maybe it's the fact that you're surrounded by 19th century furniture. Maybe it's all the paintings of Confederate generals on the walls. It's a spooky place. They lead you through first to the study, where Sorrel himself would have done his work. And then they lead you into the parlor, where the Sorrels would have held their parties. And there are two giant mirrors, one in the men's section and one in the women's section. In these giant mirrors, people see things all the time.
What? Why is there a men's section and a women's section of the
Oh,
parlor?
because after everybody had a meal and they had a good time, they would section off and the men would go smoke their cigars and talk about men things, and the women would go into the other room and be all prim and proper and drink the tea with the pinkies out. Oh, darling, did you hear about the neighbors across the street? I hear they're nouveau riche. Yes, so that kind of thing.
Oh.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about the history of the house, and that might clear some things up for you about why things were separated like that. And then let me tell you about the real spooky areas.
Okay.
The house was built in 1841. The owner, Francis Sorrel, was from Haiti. He had fled Haiti because of some uprisings taking place there. So he moved to Savannah. He built this house, which is now known as the Sorrel Weed House because he sold it to someone named Weed. And yes, exactly, Francis Sorrel. He married a young woman named Lucinda, who then died. So then he married her sister, Matilda.
Ouch!
Yeah.
Ooh. Ooh, to be the second sister.
Poor Matilda.
Can you imagine?
Well, Matilda had a rough time.
Yeah.
After years of living in the house and having a lot of children, Matilda plunged to her death from the third story and cracked her head open on the pavement below and died.
Oh.
Or did she? The story that they tell you when you come on the tour is that Mr. Sorrel had an enslaved woman that he kept in her own little chamber, separated from the other enslaved people, and he forced himself upon her regularly. And Matilda discovered them one evening, and in a fit of sorrow, plunged to her death. And then a week later, Molly, that was the woman's name, was found hanging in her chambers by suicide. Or did she? So this is the story they tell you, and they tell you that this is why the mansion is so haunted. Interestingly enough, though, Matilda Sorrel did plunge to her death from the third story of the house next door.
Wait, what?
Yes, they had moved.
Oh.
They had moved.
Oh.
Yes. He had sold the house, Francis Sorrel had sold the house to Weed, and they moved next door. And
That's
that is
weird.
where Matilda met her demise. So, if she is still haunting the grounds, it's probably not the Sorrel Weed House. Now, as for the stories of poor Molly, unfortunately, records are a bit scattered. They were not kept very well for the enslaved people. We do know that Francis Sorrel, on his records, there's a woman named Molly, but he had shipped her to New York City 3 years prior to this incident. There was a Molly across the street, we don't know. Or it could just be a story. It could just be folklore. In fact, the real reason revisionist historians believe that Matilda plunged to her death is because she was actually suffering from depression. She had been suffering from depression for years. And this is mid-19th century. We didn't have all the wonderful things we have now, like Prozac,
Right.
and Zoloft, and Lexapro. And so poor Matilda plunged to her death. And of course, suicide is not exactly condoned in this society. Also,
Right.
she had been a regular, she'd served on the board of an asylum for women. And it would have been very bad PR if word had gotten out that she had indeed had her own mental illness.
Oh.
So I can
Because
see-
at the time, mental illness was a real classist divide thing.
Exact. And in fact, there were rumors that circulated that Molly, the devilish voodoo queen that she was, had put a spell on Matilda and Francis, and had caused Matilda to plunge to her death after seducing Francis with her wiles. And then, in a fit of grief and repentance, she had killed herself a week after. Yeah. Yeah.
So first, this poor woman, she's dealing with mental health issues. She's dealing with the marriage that she was the sloppy seconds to her sister, and then now her husband is more interested in forcing himself on the servants than he is in her, and so of
Possibly.
course,
We don't. I mean, that could have very
maybe.
well happened. We don't know.
Well, either
That's
way,
a
I mean, it's her story, and then they got to go make it about her husband,
Mm-hmm.
and then not just that, but they got to add another woman who's a witch.
Right.
That sounds pretty much like history. Yep. Okay. Happy Women's History Month.
Yes. Yes. So, unfortunately, this is still the sort of the canon story that is told when you go on tours. And it is very much believed that that is the reason that the Sorrel Weed House is so haunted.
So haunted.
But if we know for sure that Matilda's suicide didn't take place on the grounds, because there are letters, there are records. They actually kept records of the rich people. And so there are records that she plunged to her death from the next house over. And we don't know for sure if Molly actually existed. So why is it so haunted? Because it is.
Oh.
Yes. Now, I didn't tell you about the basement. So, let me first finish up by telling you a little bit about the tour upstairs. As I mentioned, you do kind of get a little bit of an ominous feeling when you walk in there. The study I found very unnerving, even though apparently that is where the least amount of paranormal activity takes place.
The
And
study.
This is where the study. That's where Francis would have been conducting his business, whatever that was. Probably not good. And there's also a giant portrait of Robert E. Lee in there, which also kind of rubs you the wrong way. gonna say, yeah. Nah, yeah. So maybe that's where it came from? I don't know. But I didn't feel great in there. I really didn't feel great in there. It just felt oppressive. And then you go into the parlor area where the guests would have been entertained. And some of the other people with us reported feeling like a happiness and energy, like a party atmosphere. They went in there. And then we went to the women's section. They said that they felt stuffy. Like, you're supposed to sit with your legs crossed and not do anything fun. I personally didn't really like either room. Maybe it was those giant mirrors. You know how I am about mirrors. But where things really got creepy was when you went into the basement. And now, the basement was a miserable place to be, even in this home's heyday. This is where all the servants had to do the work of the house. And it was underground, and it was hot, and it was muggy. It's Savannah. And these people would have been down there with fires going and doing the laundry and doing the cooking, and it was dark. There was no light, no windows. It was
yuck.
And when you go down there, they don't tell you anything. They just let you kind of explore. And the first thing I noticed was I thought I wasn't in the back of the group. I was waiting for, actually, Katie, who's in the audience. I thought she was behind me. And I was waiting for her to catch up with me. And I, felt someone behind me. I saw something out of the corner of my eye, a shape, a shadow. I heard movement. And then I looked and she was in front of me. And I turned around and there was nobody behind me.
Oh.
That was kind of freaky, yeah.
Yeah.
So I was.
And this is on the way down to the basement?
This is once I was in, like once I got off the staircase walking around. And then another person in our group actually saw a tall, black, shadowy figure. And then we were later told that that's a common thing for people to see this like 7-foot shadowy figure. Feel him following you, walking around. I spoke to another woman that I met up, another friend of ours that we met up with another day, and she said that she can't even go in the house. She gets so sick. The very first time she went in there, she wanted to throw up. She had to leave. Wow. And to this day, she lives in Savannah. She cannot even walk by the house. It makes her so ill. So these are all things that make me think probably haunted.
Yeah. I mean, most likely. Plus, it's got that reputation,
Right. I hear a dog squeeze toy.
She doesn't know we're recording. She's just a child. She's only 9 years old.
So why is it haunted?
What if nobody actually committed suicide there?
Right. And why has it got to be a suicide anyway? Like, to have something be haunted, it could.
And what do we know about weed?
Not much. He's not really. Well, I mean, what do we know about weed? That's another discussion. But what?
Yeah, but specifically, the guy that he sold the house to. So it was his house while all of these suicides purportedly were taking place next door. We want to know what weed was getting up to in that house.
I don't know. There's really, that's something I'll have to explore, because that's not on the tour. They don't talk about him. They don't talk about him at all.
Interesting. But you also have to remember that it could have been haunted at the time when they sold the house, because like our guest who's coming on season 4 told us that our psychic guest told us that you get sick and oppressed by the presences in your home. Yes, no, maybe. Causing some mental illness issues. Possibly. Ding, ding. Possibly.
So here's the thing about the land that the Sorrel Weed House is built
on. Oh, okay.
The Revolutionary War. 70 years before they built this house. Right? So, right? The math. About. Okay. So the siege of Savannah during the Revolutionary War, the worst part of it actually took place in this area, in Madison Square, which is where the Sorrel Weed House is now located. Here's the thing about that battle. It took place in October of 1779, and it is considered to be the bloodiest battle of the Revolutionary War. Over 1,000 dead. Right on that land.
Well,
where the Sorrel Weed House is now built.
Yeah. So you think maybe it was haunted when it was first built?
Mm-hmm. I mean, think about all the blood
yeah.
soaking in to the land. All the ghosts. And the fact that most things are experienced in the basement. Which is interesting because we have had several people on the show say that basements tend to not be haunted.
Right.
You know,
right, exactly.
Yeah.
Up. They tend to stay in the attic, yeah.
Yes, but this basement is, partially, like the foundation is built into the ground.
Into the ground that all those battles were fought on.
Mm-hmm. Well,
into the ground in which some more unfortunate people who were separated from their party may have been interred hastily.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And where people were forced to work in very, very difficult conditions.
Oh, true. Like you said, they weren't even tracking.
Yeah. So we don't even know
servants
how
and the
many of
slaves
them
that were.
Yeah, they may have been deaths there too. Yeah. But so the actual history of the Sorrel Weed House is even more sinister and even more bloody than what you hear about on the tour.
Oh no.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, we talk a lot about Civil War history a lot, like especially in the South. It's a little obsessed with it. It's getting kind of old. But, and it's like, people kind of forget that there was another really, really bloody war fought on this same soil. Just less than 100 years prior. And, I think they're still there. I think they're still at the Sorrel Weed House.
Wow. This is like the story of the woman who swallowed the spider to catch the fly. Like, first you got to make it about the witch, and then down below that, you made it about the man. And then even down below that, you made it about the rich white lady before you get to the real crux of the haunting. Mm-hmm. It sounds like maybe there's a deeper story. Do you have a deeper story you want to tell about it? No? You don't know the story?
No, that's as
what
far
did
as
you feel, though, when you went there? Because I know you're more intuitive than you like to admit. What's your story, if you could intuit it?
I felt trapped. I felt sad. I felt like there was no way out. I felt like there was this perpetuity, like things were just going to go on and on and on the same way forever. And I didn't feel pain. A lot of people feel pain. I didn't feel sickness. I'd just gotten over a headache, so I wasn't feeling that. But I definitely felt like I was being watched. I felt like I wasn't welcome. But I wasn't. Like, I really couldn't wait to get out of there. But I kind of felt like I wasn't going to get out of there, if that makes sense.
Ooh. And you primarily felt that way in the basement?
Yeah. Upstairs, it was just like, And I think that's also kind of my own personal, I mean, I have to take into account that I have my own biases toward, like, rich white Southern slave owners. Like, I'm just, there's already this, like, I just kind of don't want to associate with you, and I already kind of have all these negative feelings. So I know that was probably part of what I was feeling upstairs. I will say, this is going to be odd. This is going to be really odd. I noticed that when I would walk by the house at night when we were leaving, I felt like I could hear people chattering, like a party, like men talking, like almost like the windows were thrown open because it was hot, even though it was a very cold night. This is what I was sensing. Like the windows are thrown open because it's hot, and you could hear the voices of everybody upstairs talking and laughing and smoking coming down into the streets. And there was even music, like a string quartet or something playing.
Oh wow.
But again, that's like my, what do I call it, my third ear.
Your third ear.
Yeah. But that's what I was getting.
Right in the middle of your forehead, above your third eye.
Exactly. Right?
Fair.
You know, sometimes you just feel like you can hear things when you can't.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of what I was getting. Once I was outside the house, it was like, oh, that's a place of merriment. But when I was inside, it was like, just, I don't know.
So that makes a slight amount of contextual sense, because when you were outside, you would have been maybe viewing the house from the point of view of somebody who wasn't part of that society. Like, oh, it's a really
looks like
nice
fun,
house.
yeah.
Oh, there's all these ladies dressed really nicely going to that house. I wish I could go to a nice party and listen to live music. And it's a different point of view than when you're inside the house and I'm just the stuffy neighbor. Oh, and more small talk. Oh. And then it's a completely different point of view than when you're in the basement and experiencing what it's like to literally slave away in a hot Savannah. It's a boiler room. It's a laundry room. There's no plumbing. People have to go boil water over an open fire and then haul it upstairs so that the rich people can take a bath. That kind of stuff. This is incredibly hard work, incredibly unpleasant work, and an incredibly unpleasant life, because, like you said, you get the feeling you're never going to be able to overcome it. It's just going to be your fate. And so it sort of makes sense, the layers of feelings that you had going through the house, I think.
Yeah, I think
from different
so.
viewpoints.
Yeah, and definitely the feeling of being watched. That was very unsettling. I always felt like somebody was like looking over my shoulder. Thank you all for popping in and listening to us. We appreciate it. You guys we really do appreciate it.
Oh man.
Thanks guys.
That was creepy. That was an eerie story. And after all that, I think I'm going to have a spooky day.
I hope you do. All right. Bye, everybody. This is Homespun Haints Live. See you next week.